Hello, and welcome at long last to my top 20 animes of the 2010s. I started working on this a long time ago, around when I finished the music list, which you'll remember came out in like January. But then various things happened on a personal, global, and local level that made me very demotivated. And it was only kind of recently that I felt like working on it again, now that the year is half over, and 2021 is quickly approaching and the relevance of this list is dwindling. I still wanted to make it. I still wanted to finish it and finish all of these other 2010 lists. So, I should point out again that I counted the entire franchise as one entry when there was multiple seasons or multiple series. And I also made it a rule that if there was such a thing, if there was like a whole franchise, then the entirety of it had to come out during the 2010s. I made another video, kind of a meta video on these lists that you can find on this channel by looking up like on 2010s lists or something that gets into my rationale behind this decision, but just wanted to note that in case you were wondering about some missions. It was likely because they actually started in the 2000s. Okay, let's get to it. Our first entry, coming in at number 20, is Non-Non-Byori. Non-passive. Okay, so this is very idyllic, rural countryside slice of life. And it really feels like it's way out in the country. These rural memes that they're dealing with, the sort of things that only someone living in the country would know are too real. And I grew up way out in the country. I grew up on a farm. And without, getting super into it right away, there's a lot of aspects of it I didn't like, that I think kind of sat heavily with me. When I see them recontextualized in this show, when I see these same sort of problems dealt with by these characters, it kind of makes me appreciate it in a different sort of light and recontextualize what it means to me and what it developed within me in my overall kind of personal growth. So it's very satisfying, and it's a very kind of therapeutic thing, I think, to look at the countryside in this new way. They have a great avenue for exploring these rural memes. The character Hotaru has just moved out to the countryside from Tokyo and is coming to grips with all these changes of lifestyle around her. And this just provides a really great focal point for the viewer, no matter how experienced they are with rural trappings, to appreciate and educate themselves on what it means. And there's a great appreciation and kind of awe of the sublimity of nature. So many plot points are just around natural occurrences, natural practices, the passing of seasons. And I just love the ancientness of these themes, that these stories would be relatable to people generations back, because these traditions haven't really changed, and going into the future as well, probably nothing will age of these sorts of plots. And it just has this really soothing kind of both permanently nostalgic and constantly renewing feelings. It's wonderful. But, it's not just this nature appreciation show. It's very uniquely quirky and funny, too. One of the major departures from normal slice of life structure is that they just go to a single room school. There's like a total of 6 students across all sorts of grades. Whereas typically the cast of these shows will all be around the same age. So seeing characters at whole different stages of life is really, really fun and a nice change of pace. They each have their own comedic niche. Renge, her very bizarre childlike surreality. Komari in middle school, bursting with overconfidence and feeling herself already an adult. It feels like very appropriate for the ages of these characters for them to be in these kind of mental states, and yet, they're very uniquely charming as just individual people on their own, of course. There's various special guest characters that don't show up too often, more distant relatives or local adults that run like the candy shop lady and stuff. They feel very well realized, even though they show up not that often. I really appreciate that in stories, when even the side characters feel like they could have lives of their own just as deep and interesting as the protagonists. And it's kind of hype, too. in a show that's so much about perspective, that's so much about how each individual sees the world. Just having a new character thrown into that balance, providing some insight or capability that the rest of them didn't. It's kind of hype. It's a strange word to use, but it is hype. Even more importantly than all this comedy, there's a sentimentality of seeing important moments in so many stages of life that I find very, very heartwarming. And I think this is the truest strength of having this one-room school set up, that we can get a sampling of these characters in all sorts of different stages of life. And on top of that, they even have like flashback chapters and stuff too. And I think this fits in really nicely with that timeless, eternal, natural theme that we're kind of seeing what feels like a large, large swath of someone's life. Again, in contrast to these slice of life series, which are, as you would expect, much more of a slice. So it's quite beautiful. And then I hope as the manga continues, we'll just see more and more of that. This sort of heart emerging so wonderfully from the settings and characters is very important. This is a theme we'll explore again and again and again in these slides. Because all of these series, I think, have that in common, that as you get to know the aesthetic, as you get to know the characters and the setting, you realize that there's something very tender, very precious at the heart of it. What wows me the most, though, and this is kind of a production type thing, is how often they're totally willing to break up the comedy, break up the action, break up the plot with just long, perfectly still shots of nature. And you could say, oh, well, that's a budgeting technique. They're doing that because that's a very cheap and easy cut to make, just a shot of the wilderness. But they're so beautifully painted and drawn. They're so perfectly capturing like an emotional moment or tone that kind of both contrasts and weaves into the plot up until that point. And I just appreciate that willingness to just kind of stop, to just allow everything to breathe for a bit. Really beautiful show. Oops, I should have like hyped it up a bit. But next, evidently, at number 19, we have Kill La Kill, this explosively aesthetic masterpiece from Trigger. It's so cute, so cool, so girly, but so edgy. It's the quadfecta. This is like a meme among our friends right now. It's a long story, but we often will be like, wow, cute but cool, girly but edgy, to just like describe something that may or may not actually have all of those qualities, but is just praiseworthy. But I think this show actually has it all. Like, there's moments of great endearingness with almost all of the protagonists. There's genuinely a sense of what, for lack of a better word, we can call girliness, like almost like shoujo-esque arcs and qualities of self-realization, of self-transformation. Things that I associate much more with shoujo as a genre than shonen, which is much more straightforwardly like get strong. But of course, you also get strong, and you get strong in crazy aesthetic ways, in super edgy transformations and proclamations and stuff. And, you know, so cool, that obviously speaks for itself. So I think it does achieve the quadfecta. So many amazing character designs, and each has so many hype transformations. And again, here the real shonen quality is coming out. But I think Trigger just has this unique sensibility of how a character can look, how extreme can they go in certain qualities, and still make it seem not just like kind of an abomination, but something legitimately badass, someone that you want to see fight and do all sorts of cool stuff. These animation, it hits extremes. It's Trigger at its most shitposty, with like 2-frame little comedic scenes that seem like they're just kind of scrawled in 5 seconds, but really, really capture the imagination and are hilarious. And then some amazing sakuga, just flowing, vivid fight choreography with amazing, bold camera angles and just really awesome, escalating sense of action. It gets it both extremes covered. Fantastic. And the soundtrack, oh, perhaps the hypest part of all, just explodes with this energy. Don't lose your way. Oh, don't lose your way. I can't remember the next line. Oh, it's so good. I don't know. It's fantastic. But this isn't even talking about the actual substance and plot of the series, which I think is sometimes underappreciated when people just remember the outfits and the fight scenes and kind of the story beats. But the way it's set up is actually very intricate and quite interesting. First, you kind of get this sense of a very wacky world being built around you, one that's quite dystopian but has just so many unique and quintessentially trigger kind of aesthetic charms that doesn't feel like bleak, it doesn't feel despairing, but just this place of ripe for imaginative potential. It's like, oh, anything could happen here. There's this fantastic shonen battle plot that kind of serves as the story's first anchor. You know, Ryuko is just going to fight stronger and stronger people. They're going to get weirder and weirder. She's going to get stronger and stronger herself. She's going to build up a team of allies. Hell yeah! What more could you want? That's just a essential shonen plot in a tea. But then, as the series advances, this bizarre astrological lore, that's a fancy word meaning relating to the apocalypse, which is a fancy word meaning the end of the world, starts to consume and explode this shonen simplicity, and you realize that the stakes are much higher than you realized, that there's way more factions and interested parties, that little threads of lore they mentioned actually all tie together into this bizarre kind of origin story of the entire planet. It just gets crazier and crazier, super interesting, super compelling. You have no idea where the plot is going to go. And the way that this actually subverts the kind of main fight different people story is really fantastic, that all of the relations start changing during these revolutions as you have these big epiphanies. Characters meaningfully change. They actually form new alliances. They actually see things through different light. And then this allows not just for, you know, more hype team-ups, more hype matchups and stuff, but fresh perspectives on how these characters actually operate, or like what are their motivations within motivations and stuff. Really just well written in that regard. But then the kind of final layer, which I've only been thinking about more recently, is in very small kind of hidden pieces of lore, details thrown in very inconsequentially, but still very purposefully, that at a first read you might think just kind of gives some flavor enhancement in general, just give a sense of depth to the world building. But if you kind of extrapolate the moral messages of these little almost Easter eggs of detail, you realize that this is quite an inspirational and beautiful anti-fascist masterpiece, all about freeing yourself, knowing yourself, living authentically, not submitting to like the rule of others. And on a first read, you can say, okay, well, it's obviously about that, but it's much more deep and morally grounded than you might think. Like it provides a very strong and compelling argument against fascism in a lot of very interesting ways. And if you're curious about that, check out this video, Kill la Kill Decoded, on Vimeo. It's not on YouTube because it has a whole bunch of clips from the series, so they don't like that. But Vimeo, you get away with it somehow, so check it out. It's really good. It's like 45 minutes long, but it's definitely worth a watch. Really made me appreciate the series on yet another level. Okay, after that, at number 18, we have The Rolling Girls. Oh my god, just look at this beautiful, beautiful shot. So this is Wit Studio's true masterpiece of animation. Wit Studio is the company that did like Attack on Titan, and the one about the train, and Demon Slayer? Was Demon Slayer that or Ufotable? I don't know, I get some Wit Studio projects and Ufotable projects mixed up, but definitely regarded, like Ufotable, as one of those like amazing animation type studios that usually do kind of fairly popular action series. But this, I think, is their true masterpiece, especially when it comes to the actual animation production. It's so beautiful and colorful and energetic and boldly creative and unique. Every single explosion is a work of art. I'll bet money on it that you can't find one uninteresting explosion in this series. The sense of speed and impact is reflected in every frame and sound. I think just in terms of kinetic energy, there's very, very few series that can touch this. It's the psychedelic dream of an action series, even more than Flip Flappers. R.I.P. Flip Flappers! It came in at number 21 when I was making this list. I really wanted to talk about Flip Flappers too, but just didn't quite make the cut. Why can't Wit Studio make more shows like this? All their shows are usually so dark and edgy, and this showed such amazing, beautiful, optimistic type potential, and then they just went back to like another season of Attack on Titan. But I should point out, this is true only since I started making these slides. They're doing a show for Netflix that came out called Great Pretender, and it's fantastic. It's really colorful, it's very fun. The plot is so far outside of the norm for anime, just much more like kind of like a Hollywood crime thriller than any sort of traditional anime plot. It's a really, really, really fun. Very, very highly recommended. Okay. So the plot and setting for this series is just enticingly barely sensible. Like you scramble to try to figure out what the heck is going on and what it could all mean. And you feel so compelled because everything is just so interesting that you'd like to know why there are so many bizarre choices made in the lore. So let's try to break it down. What's going on here? And I do this in service of people picking up the show, because if you read like summaries, sometimes it's really confusing, and if you just try to go in blind, it's quite disorienting. So I think this is a good kind of intro to what the show's going to be like. So each Japanese prefecture has become an independent nation. They've become isolated, hyper-exaggerated versions of themselves based on the local tropes and cultural landmarks. It's like a caricature of each prefecture is now an independent nation in Japan. They're constantly waging war on each other, but not through traditional means, but through these proxy battles waged by bests. And they usually possess these heart-shaped stones that give them superhero-level powers. And they either fight directly, or they compete over things, or they generally just try to solve their disputes by competing just with these representatives, and everyone else can live peacefully. So our heroes are traveling around gathering these stones and injecting themselves into the local issues. It's a very traditional shonen-y kind of plot structure, very reminiscent of One Piece, where characters roll up to some wacky place. Takes them a while to figure out what's going on. They usually learn about some sort of injustice, or in this series, it's not often that there's an actual villain or anything, but they learn about some sort of conflict, and they try to resolve it and get the stones for yet another plot. And there's a million other twists. There's a million other side plots. And I think if this sounds enticing to you, and if you can kind of ground yourself on the relative simplicity of this sort of premise, then the rest of that stuff is just kind of extraneous fun, and just kind of like a joyride of, whoa, wait, that person is that person? Whoa, why are they doing that? Wait, where did this person come from? Why does it look like a teapot? And none of that stuff matters all that much in terms of your enjoyment of it. What matters in the end is that roaring shonen-y spirit of determination, camaraderie, miracles, and the sweetness of the eventual triumph. Such a satisfying show to watch. Okay, now at number 17, we have Flying Witch. Another journey out to the countryside. So the premise here is a trainee witch moves from the city out to the countryside to continue her studies, to become more enriched in magic by living out in nature. It's more rural bliss. I don't know why I like these rural shows so much. I think I have kind of a complex about it after I grew up in the country. I think I just really do find this sort of lifestyle fascinating, and I think it's quite kind of beautiful, a beautiful life, lived out kind of doing traditional things and just sort of laboring for your own sustainment and stuff. But personally, I like to keep my hands clean. I don't like grubbing around in the dirt, and I like going to restaurants. So, you know, RIP restaurants because of COVID, but I wrote these slides back in February, so... There's an extremely relaxed pace on this show, but I really like how it's structured, that there's always kind of some experience, some discovery, something that the characters want to have and appreciate that's just kind of gently nudging the plot along. It's not so much like crises or events as it is just this constant cycle of learning and appreciating and growing. This is something I praise about the series every time I talk about it, which is the idea of reflective wonder. That Makoto comes out to the farm and is wowed by their rural practices, by the sort of caretaking they do of the land, by the traditions they have. And then reflectively, her friends are wowed by her magic, of course. Things that maybe she takes for granted are brand new and of course, kind of mind-blowing to them. But again, her magic is rooted in kind of very small, simple things that kind of have the same aesthetic and same deliberateness as farming, as taking care of the land. It's Miyazakian. I really think that if you're a fan of Studio Ghibli's works and Miyazaki's works, especially not like the big action scenes and stuff, of course, but the small things, the slice of life, seeing those magical worlds and seeing how they operate and stuff, and just having that sense of appreciation and wonder that the Miyazaki leads often have as they're immersed in those new worlds. Not just with the magical things, not just with the supernatural things, but all the little things. Appreciating everything. This is the show for you. Check it out. The sense of deep cooperation with nature, tradition, cycles of growth, seasons. It's as I said, it's just so enchanting. Just the eternal nature of these themes, and the fact that they just kind of go on even without us, without our involvement, without having to label it, without having to study it. That these are just things happening in nature that we can appreciate and we can work with. It's just ancient wisdom and common practice is overwhelming to really consider. If you think about the entire span of human history, going back to our first cave-dwelling days, our first agricultural settlements, the things we've been doing the same way since then, or close to the same way since then, or that have even just some small overlapping elements in the structure of the work and such. It's overwhelming. It's overwhelming to kind of put it in place with that legacy. And the series does it so well because you're seeing this both in the rural practices, and then you understand that magic has that same depth to it, that it has that same continuity to it. Even though it isn't really said explicitly, it's not like they kind of go on a lecture about this connection, but you just appreciate it as you watch the show. Yeah, magic is presented in these same terms, gently whirling, building into a space of infinite potential, of infinite past and infinite future. I like this idea of gently world building that, as I said, nobody's just kind of lecturing you, but from incident after incident, you slowly kind of pick up what it's like. But then, again, it's not so overwhelming. It's not this gigantic, grand, mind-boggling series. It's still just very comforting, everyday, slice-of-life show. You just kind of see what they're up to today. Makoto's attitude, I really think, is super endearing and admirable. Just her willingness to learn, her excitement with new things, her deep sense of appreciation, her love for her friends. It's goals. It's the sort of person that I really want to be. I find her such a admirable character. I don't think I have another point here. Okay, so moving on to 16, we have Girls' Last Tour. This is cute girls doing post-apocalyptic things. What an amazing sentence. There's a lot of tension and intrigue through this series, and I think it's generated through this perfect trifecta of mystery. That there's a lot of things that are known to us, but not the girls. There's a lot of things that are known to the girls, but not to us. And then the biggest category, of course, is mutual unknowns. So they roam through these kind of post-apocalyptic areas, and they know their history. They know why they're there. They know where they think they're going. But a lot of this isn't communicated to the viewer. So we just kind of see them going about their lives, and we're not really sure what it all signifies to them. But then the kind of context, the things they're interacting with, the things they're trying and failing to read, the things they're trying to understand the significance of, often those are objects that are obvious to us. Those are things we recognize from the real world. That's an airplane. That's a gun. That's a fish. But those are things that they have to kind of build up their own knowledge of, and they have their own kind of idiosyncratic understanding of. But then, of course, as I said, the most enchanting category, now that you're sort of allied with them in this give and take of knowledge, are just mutual unknowns. That this world is so hauntingly mysterious, so compelling it is to try to figure out why it is the way it is, and what means of what remains. And then, of course, there's like this meta unknown of like, where is this all going? And the series is so bizarre tonally. Um, this wide range of kind of goofy, lighthearted comedy and heartwarming moments of camaraderie, and then just this potential for real despair, of real loss and isolation, and a feeling of loneliness and distance and darkness, that you're like, how far are they going to go with this? Like, what could happen? What could go wrong? It really seems like there's so much potential. The world building is a perfect mix of kind of a post-apocalypse tropes and surreally new concepts that you see, kind of what you would expect from a post-apocalyptic series, the scattered metal and decaying vehicles and scraps of life that once was. And it's very satisfying to kind of see all those things and see how our main characters interact with them. But then some aspects of the world they build are just so surreal and new, again, just mysterious, that it creates an aesthetic that is like no other. It's unafraid to lean into the genuine horrors of the scenario despite the cuteness, as I was kind of talking about before. But it doesn't shy away from them. It really makes you consider, what would it be like to be these girls? How scared would they get? You know, resource crises, desperate encounters, the pathetic embrace of the smallest comforts. All of these things are not shied away from. They become focal points of episodes. They don't coddle you. They don't make you think that it will for sure be all right. They let you really wonder, is everybody going to be okay? The desperation between the two of them, it reminds me of Waiting for Godot, the Samuel Beckett play, or The Lighthouse, a Dave Eggers movie that came out a few years ago. Both stories of people just kind of isolated together, that have very little agency or control over their ultimate situation, and are just kind of trying to stay alive and pass the time, until something happens, until somehow they, their, their lives can change. It has that same kind of surreal comedy to it. It has the same weird kind of desperation, the sort of relationship tropes that only emerge when characters have been stuck together for a very, very long time and just kind of know each other inside out. It's good, but it's kind of frightening, you know? It has this sort of mania lurking beneath the surface that, again, you're like, not sure. You're genuinely not sure how far this series will go. But it's genuinely cute too. Despite all that, it really is very heartwarming and endearing and cute, and it's so blobby. The character designs get just so over the top, like bleh. I love it. I love it. In their isolation and scarcity, there's this kind of camping-like coziness, and we'll talk about that camping-like coziness more for a later entry. But just that sense of kind of preparing things, bringing things with you, hoping you have everything you need just for this duration. That feeling of comfort, of closeness, of kind of building up experiences from yourself. They manage to achieve it here too, even though the times are so desperate, even though it's being forced upon them by these circumstances. You still feel the charm. The newness of the world, there's a playful discovery and purest joy. Some of my favorite scenes are where they find something they don't really understand and just relax and play with it for a bit. And the vicarious experience of seeing it new for the first time is so wonderful. All of these impaired contrasts combine into a rare and beautiful mood, something that I really don't see in many series. I've heard YKK, Yokohama Kaidashi Kiko, is also very similar from a friend of mine who's a big fan of this series and also this series, so gotta check that out too. I'm surprised I haven't yet. It's like a classic. Okay. Next at number 15, we have Space Patrol Luluko! Another trigger show, but this one is the most triggery trigger show of all time. I really think so. This is just Trigger creating a trigger show for the sake of celebrating everything that it means for something to be a trigger show. It's the pinnacle of trigger budgeting. It's like an even further extreme than Kill la Kill, that they have 2 frames for comedy dialogue, and then when the battles start, it's like $300,000 spent per cut. The aesthetics and world building are so unique, but kind of thrillingly evocative, that they suggest, actually like Kill la Kill, like past trigger shows. They suggest other anime. They suggest like video games. They suggest this kind of retro futurism thing, where like, what if everything had the technological power of today, but still looked like an original Game Boy screen? It's so exciting. You just want to see how everything is in this world. The cast, all max endearing and wacky and badass and comprehensible. The characters they throw at you in this series are so over the top, so difficult to imagine persisting beyond one joke or one battle scene, but then actually become really endearing. You actually become very attached to even the goofiest character designs and really want to see them through to the end. Oh, and then the crossovers and cameos kick it into an even higher manic gear, where it really feels like anything starts being possible, and the actual meaning of what you're seeing starts crumbling down just in the face of sheer hype. Who cares what it means? I am enjoying myself. It ends up being this thesis that boldly justifies the very existence of the studio. I don't know how deep I want to get here, but basically the message of the show is that creative energy, like this show, is really what's important. It's really what like fuels the universe. You'll see if you watch it. It's not like this is an explicitly like meta statement or whatever, but it makes it pretty clear that this is Trigger's kind of thesis of itself. That this is Trigger saying, this is why we do what we do, and here it is. This is us doing what we're doing too. Isn't that fantastic? The plotline explodes from mundanity to universal apocalypse crisis. Very much another Trigger staple, but here, just because of the short nature of it, it's kicked up into the nth degree. There's twist after twist, subversion after subversion, shocking leaps in every single direction. And it really does feel like 4 seasons crammed into 13 8-minute episodes, because for some reason, I guess because it really should feel like 4 seasons, they, after like 3 episodes, they'll be like, season 2? What? Sure? And then those usually signify like a major change in kind of the structure and scale of the show. So crazy. The way that absurdities are written first as jokes and then transcend into legitimate lore, I think, is hilarious. Another kind of very triggery thing. Of course, here the legitimate lore is in many ways just as hilarious, if not more so. But just that feeling of like, they say something that sounds like a gag, and then like 3 episodes later, you're like, oh, but what about the thing? It's fantastic. Quintessentially Trigger. The cycle of escalation through comedy and hype. Trigger just firing on all cylinders in this regard. Everything feeding into each other. But through this madness, and this is what I'm saying again, the hidden heart, beautiful and meaningful themes still emerge. The depiction of love especially is just so beautiful and so sincere, that even though everything else is nth degree ironic and self-referential and outwardly referential and this kind of insane self-justifying thesis, there's still these moments where they talk about what it's like to be in love, and they show the power of first love, and it really touches me. And come on, it's only 104 minutes long. The entire series is just a little longer than the average movie. So check it out. It's just an afternoon's watch, and it's so fantastic. Okay. Then at number 14, we have Wataten. Hooray! Watashi ni tenshi ga moritai. an angel came down to me. So when we first talked about the series during the seasonal anime review video, we dodged it. Instead, we just talked about what does it mean to review something? What is the importance of morality in art? What responsibility does a reviewer have to moral standards that they may believe in or that they just may see reflected in society? How should that influence their understanding of art? And it was, I think, a pretty interesting conversation, but mostly I used it as a way to dodge talking about Wataten. Then, in the Best Anime of 2019 video, we dodged it again. We talked about how it was kind of like perfect, how you can complain about what it is, but you couldn't change it to be a better version of what it is, and how it's just this gigantic social capital pit that by liking it and by admitting that you like it, you're just shoveling your social capital into a huge black hole, and embarrassing yourself, just viscerally embarrassing yourself. Like I'm embarrassing myself right now, putting it on this list. But that's peak anime. That, you know, if you're watching anime, you're not doing it because you want respect. You're not doing it because you want to lift your standing in society. And so by watching embarrassing shows like this, where the premise is so cringy, you're saying this is what anime is to me. You know, it's beyond that. It's not about that. It's something else. It's something special. So, how will we dodge talking about it this time? I've used up my two kind of interesting meta perspectives, I think. Now I think we actually have to talk about the show. How terrifying. So this, I think, is a really relaxing and enchanting slice of life series. I think it hits those very important levels of slice of life where you're just kind of zoned out and relaxed, and you know that the show isn't going to stress you out even slightly. And you're just kind of enchanted too by just how well done everything is, by how good the animation is and the soundtracking and the voice acting, and you're just kind of like, oh, this is good. Oh yeah, this is good. Few other shows hit that level. So comfy, so idyllic. I think the show really excels in feeling like, you know, these are the golden days. That this is a stage in the characters' lives where they can afford to live like they are, totally carelessly, totally peacefully, just kind of enjoying each other's company, having these sort of small, self-indulgent projects that don't necessarily need to amount to anything, but are just for their own amusement. Just the sense of like, and it's reflected in the show too, that like these are the good days. Like we're just really enjoying ourselves now. The subtle but expertly realized episode structure brings the perfect level of significance. I think these slice of life shows that go like ultra comfy sometimes have an issue where the plots start feeling samey or directionless, and you can't really think, you know, what episode is that scene in. That's not necessarily a problem. Like that's just kind of something else. That's something kind of showing these anime genres stretching outside what we think of as normal good storytelling. So I'm not mad at that, but it is nice to see a show where they definitely put some effort into kind of making running themes throughout an episode, having like kind of central focuses, but it's subtle. It's not beating you over the head with like, this episode is about this. These types of jokes will keep occurring, but just the nice, I don't know, it's like really good sitcom writing, I think, in that regard. Oh man, the production quality is just so good. Like, I don't know, it's so baffling to me. It's like the more degenerate the premise, the fewer people that will like the premise, the more effort Doga Kobo puts into animating it. It's baffling. Like, I swear the market must be shrinking so much when you compare a show like this and, like, I don't know, Yesterday wa Utarete or whatever. The latter being a very mainstreamly accessible show, a show that nobody should be embarrassed to watch. And, you know, it receives an okay budget and it looks fine. And then Wataten, a show for insane people that you have to be insane to have even heard of, is like this glorious cinematic masterpiece that they had teams of hundreds working round the clock. Just, what the hell? What are they doing? Like, that's just so hilarious to me. I think I love this show more because even more because of that. Like, just why does it exist? And it's really funny too. As I said, the fact that it exists is cracking me up already. But it's self-awareness, like the relationship of the show's own perspective and morality to its very problematic complexes and kind of character traits and character flaws. The self-awareness it has, the number of times the plot line is about how inappropriate the premise of the show is, and it's like very unresolved. It's left in this kind of like almost manic, like, well, we don't know if this is okay. Like, I don't know, maybe she should get canceled. Like, it's just, it just like doesn't give a shit. Like, it doesn't try very hard to justify itself, and it really makes light of like the very fact that it exists, that it can kind of get away with being this story. You'll notice I never told you what the plot is because that's too embarrassing, but it's so weird. It's like, what are they doing? Oh, it's good. It's very funny though. A lot of those scenes where Miyako is getting in trouble, it just cracks me up. And as I said, as I alluded to before, this feeling of like anime should be embarrassing, like it shouldn't be something you're proud of, but instead something you do despite the fact that it's embarrassing, or maybe even because of the fact that it's embarrassing. That kind of captures something unique to anime, I think is actually quite important. Like, how do I put this? We emerge into a secret place, which doesn't really make any sense. But it's like, did I make another point? Having our reservations overwhelmed by the quality of the show itself is powerful, uniquely anime. That does feel true, and I think it's more than that too. It's a sense of like that within deep otakudom, within being so into anime that you hear about shows like this and watch them and like them, you've sacrificed, maybe. You've made sacrifices of your social life. You've committed to not being a normie. And, you know, maybe that's no great loss for you. Like, I don't know, who wants to be a normie? Who cares? But you start to have this perspective of like, only by coming this far can I appreciate this. Only by arriving at this secret place can I know that, can I like understand this? Can I really appreciate it? And it feels special. It feels like, oh, this is what I get instead. This appreciation for this dumbass stupid show. What am I talking about? Okay, we gotta move on. Yeah, that's 1 out of 10. Anytime we try to talk about this show, it just becomes something like this. Okay. Here's a nice normie appropriate show that anyone can watch. It's Mob Psycho coming in at number 13. This, I think, is the perfect blend of a heartwarming portrait and then, of course, high-octane psychic battles. Likewise, it's a perfect genre blend, too. We have comedy, horror, sci-fi, action, and slice of life. When all of those things are absent, or perhaps in smaller doses, it's a nice, gentle slice of life. So many series, I think, can achieve only both. That it's like, oh, this part is great action, and then, wow, we really connect with these characters, and it's very heartfelt slice of life. But not the fusion, not the feeling that it's really the same characters going through it, that even during these battles, it's the same people, that everything is going to impact the other meaningfully and significantly and without kind of hand-waving it with, I don't know, they go into a magical dimension to fight or something. No. None of that. It's just the same world, the same reality. I think this fusion requires absolutely masterful writing to achieve, and one, of course, the genius behind this and One Punch Man is certainly up for the task. The secret, I think, is that the characters always come first, that the plot isn't written, or the characters aren't written just in service to the plot, that they'll just kind of do whatever is necessary to advance the plot, but that the plot moves in service of the characters, that it's just what would really happen if all of these characters were kind of involved with each other. Even if it was just slice of life, or even if it was just shonen battles, it would be super compelling. And One Punch Man, which is much more on the battle side and doesn't really, I mean, to some extent it does, but usually just for comedy. It doesn't really get into the personal dramas of the characters outside of how it interferes with their hero lives. it would still be super compelling, but it's the fact that these characters move in both spaces. Characters lean on archetypes without overly subverting them. Like, you know, you have like your punk characters, your bodybuilder characters, the fake psychic, the real fake psychic, the real psychic. I don't know. Yeah, all these kind of tropes, and this is something about One's writing that I really appreciate. It's like he'll subvert them by making them more interesting and giving them more depth and kind of story potential. But he won't just be like, haha, a twist. It turns out that you thought this kind of character would be this kind of character, but instead it's this completely other type of character. He allows you to embrace that familiarity and enjoy why those character archetypes are so recurring and so timeless. And then this extends to even much more minor characters, like arc-based role-playing characters. That is, oh, this is just the antagonist of this arc, or this is just some motivator for this arc, or whatever. That the tropes kind of help you get up to speed with the character, and then they remain very compelling and endearing, even if all they have to do is kind of be who they are for that arc. The pacing ranges from just short one-episode adventures to mini arcs. There's these 2-episode mini arcs that I think are just so masterfully done, just like amazingly crafted into 2 22-minute segments. 2 big expansive sagas that involve tons and tons of characters we've seen up until now and have gigantic consequences for the rest of the series. Each form feels very complete, cinematic, and I think it's an amazing reinterpretation of the manga. That, of course, all of these things are from the manga, but they changed the pacing quite a bit. They like cut liberally, they expanded on some things, and I think they really had an amazing vision in mind of something that they could make that's, as I said, like a very cinematic experience, that you're just gripped by it from start to finish, that it doesn't have the kind of shortcomings of something where you're watching episode by episode. Studio Bones, of course, godly animators. I think this is the pinnacle of like the manga being remastered in the same way that it's all from the manga, but One could never animate like this. One is a very amateurish artist. These very endearingly simple designs and sketches, sometimes questionable use of perspective or some overly ambitious explosions and action shots, are now so wonderfully realized without losing any of that charm, without losing the bizarreness and the real idiosyncraticity of his choices. Yeah, One's strengths are emphasized by total freedom and a multimedia kaleidoscope of animation. Their willingness to break out the crayons and the pastels and the watercolors and scribble all over the place and use some really cool 3D effects and any tool they have in their kit, all in service of highlighting the uniqueness of different strengths of One, I think is just fantastic. Season 3, please. Come on, you're almost done. Season 3 would be able to cover all of the remaining arcs, and there's some fantastic material in there. So I really, really am hoping for that. All right, next at number 12, we have Take You! That's one of the Take You piece. Ah, dude, I love Take You. You gotta freaking put Take You on the list. This is an aggressively nonsensical gag comedy masquerading as a slice of life about tennis. It's actually just about absolutely everything else under the sun. Each episode is only 2 minutes long, but it's absolutely packed with jokes and plot. And there's 9 seasons that have just been released, scattered throughout the 2010s. So even though you can get through a season in about 20 minutes, it adds up to something pretty substantial. Events are linked by the barest of sensibility. They just kind of surge randomly around like in a static dream. That the episode can start one way and then very, very rapidly escalate into an entirely different plot. Things just kind of showing up, popping up, conversation topics, derailing and then resubstantiating as the actual focus. It's crazy. The comedy is similarly varied. we got movie parodies, we got puns, we got running gags, very absurd characters, very bizarre but still traditional bokeh tsukomi, where you have the idiot character and then the straight man who reprimands them. Like they use that structure a lot, but with such bizarre jokes. It's really consistently hilarious, though. I think every episode of the show will make me laugh. The animation is limited. It's like if we were talking about those trigger shows that have the two extremes. You only take this extreme, the shitposty side. Most episodes, they're 2 minutes and they have maybe 20 total frames. But it's brilliant and it's really genuinely charming. Like, I think because they can't really afford to animate it properly, they at least made every one of those frames funny or silly or bizarre in whatever way. It's full of just weird details and bizarre facial expressions, and it's just so fun. The budget-saving efforts are highlighted with like really hilarious self-awareness that they don't try to cover it up, they don't try to gloss it over, but instead emphasize like what is this? What are we looking at? Why does it look the way it does? The overall pace means none of these cheap shots ever drag. You're never feeling like it's tediously bad animation, but because it's only 2 minutes long and the plot moves so rapidly, you don't have any sense of like, right, like I'm tired of seeing this. I'm tired of them showing me this. And I'm a huge lover of the non-diegetic imagination space. This is something we talk about in anime quite a bit, where instead of like when a character starts talking about something or imagining something, or they're talking about some hypothetical, they depict it. They don't just talk about it, but they show it in imagination or like or like in a gag that doesn't represent diegesis, that like didn't really happen. And this series, like every single shot is like that. It just spams the dopamine button for me. For some reason, that sort of thing I just love. Like it just makes me elated. Whenever a character says something and then it's reflected, even symbolically or abstractly, visually, even though there's no storytelling reason it should be. And it's kind of like the logic or illogic, total lack of logic, of that freedom of the imagination space spills over into the real world of the show. And that's kind of how the plot grows and changes and is motivated, is just by the characters' demented imaginations, that it just overflows out into the world, and then the other characters react with their own overflowing of imagination. It's insane. Basically, the show will make you feel like you're having a seizure in a good or bad way. Not to make light of epilepsy. I know IRL seizures are very, very bad, but you know what I mean. It's overwhelming, and you're overstimulated visually, and you have a hard time piecing together the causality or connection of recent memories, and the whole thing just leaves you stunned. But for me, in a very, very good way. But once you've submitted to this insanity, something truly beautiful emerges. Nah, not really. I think where the show seems beautiful to me, once you really understand it, once you appreciate it, is on the meta level. That this is just a bizarre little manga that somehow got this adaptation with a very, very limited studio staff. I think most of the animation is handled by just one person, who I think is also the manga artist. Despite that, they managed to get like really high-profile VAs. Like Hanakana is one of the characters. Why? I have no idea. And the fact that it just kept going, that they made 9 seasons of this, that there's like hundreds of episodes of this insanity, is really beautiful to me, and I think it reflects something very, very special about the medium. Okay, for the last show we're going to talk about in this segment, before we do the next 10 in another segment, is Bloom Into You. This is the obligatory Yuri pick. You gotta do it for the culture. you gotta pick a Yuri series for sure. It's a beautiful and gripping story of self-discovery, both in love and how you're kind of placed in society. There's deep philosophical questions of identity and expectation, understanding others, what we can ask of each other, what we can ask of ourselves, and of course love. What does love mean to us? What will love mean to our beloved? These are all proposed and investigating not through like distinct separate monologues, not because the characters pontificate about these questions at length, but they just sort of emerge through the actions, through the way that the characters are faced with choices and make decisions. We see this sort of philosophy emerge, that all of these things mirror these greater, more abstract questions. Just as the plot develops and unfolds and we learn about their lives better and things happen to them, we see this great kind of contemplative picture emerging just naturally, just blooming, if you will. Everything is kept very tight and simple. There's not many big dramatic movements in the plot. There's not forced drama, to use that old cliche, but rather they kind of keep it as tight as possible, just really focusing on these sorts of questions, on these big decisions, on these moments of introspection and revelation. And yet, I find the depth of the characters and just the little slices of story that we see in other people's lives, the little side plots and B plots and stuff, reflect a really rich world, like behind the scenes. That it's not just this kind of fantasy world of just these two girls, but instead the real world with all of its complexities and all of its struggles through which this one small plot we're following. The adaptation is it's adequate. It's not mind-blowing. As a big fan of the manga, I was super excited to hear it announced and quite disappointed that not one of my absolute favorite studios picked it up, but they did a good job. I just think about like how Shaft could have done it. Damn, that could have been good. But it's fine. Cinematic scenes the big climactic scenes are given a lot of like really cinematic love, and it's very powerful. Even if it's not the most mind-blowing sakuga, it's like, yeah, they really went for it. Like, they really tried to make a rich cinematic experience where you're kind of, ooh, But Yuri isn't about these gigantic climactic scenes, What matters most is the decision-making behind those scenes, the way the characters grow and change that leads them to make those proclamations or whatever. And the way I've always put it is that Yuri is about the outermost reaching of innermost feelings. And we can get hugely in depth, and I do want to at some point get hugely in depth about why I attribute that more uniquely to Yuri than just like romance in general and stuff. The feeling of kind of secrecy and innocence, and just how that intersects with gay relations in Japan and stuff. Anyways, but in the end, this is the sort of feeling I have about Yuri, that it's all about something very precious and kind of tender and fragile, reaching out and connecting with someone else who is also reaching out with those innermost feelings. And likewise, what matters most are these smaller, everyday scenes. And I think in the adaptation, they do a really good job of reflecting that side of tenderness. And it's not something you need a big animation budget to do. You just need to know how to kind of give the characters space and give the scenes space and have good kind of facial reactions and such, that it can get across what these small moments mean emotionally for the characters, what they signify in that slow reaching out and connecting. And for that alone, I think this is a tremendous achievement in Yuri adaptation. It's something that I don't really think any other show has done so well yet when it comes to Yuri. Other shows have done fine, but this is the first one where I was like, yes, that is the feeling I get when reading Yuri manga. They've done more of it here. They haven't just brought over the stuff that was in the manga, but they get it. They can create Yuri anime. For the first time ever, science has created Yuri anime. But it's tough because it's different in manga. It's the way you do it is different in manga. So to translate that into anime, I think is quite the achievement. I remember when the show was first announced, I made a post on Reddit that said how happy I was, how this will do more than anything else to show people that Yuri isn't a genre just made for and by straight men, as kind of pervy porn, but like a really beautiful genre with a long history and really amazing kind of messages and goals and stuff. Someone gave me Reddit Gold for that, which was funny. Never happened before or since. I didn't use it for anything at all, but I was like, wow, somebody out there is another big fan. And I think it achieved that. I think if you watch this, you'll appreciate Yuri more than if you watch any other show, and you'll be able to kind of sink into the genre, I hope. So yeah, good, good, good. Onwards. Viva Yuri! They'll someday understand. They'll someday understand. Okay. We will record the next segment probably tomorrow or maybe later tonight. Not that that matters to you, because I'm going to wait until I have both recorded to upload them, to avoid an embarrassing situation where part 1 is out and then part 2 just never exists. But yeah, I worked really hard on this. I worked really hard on the next 10 too. Please try to guess what they are. I always find that very interesting and fun. But yeah, I hope you look forward to it. Bye bye. You know what? Here's the first show we're going to talk about in the next segment.